have to first of all make a confession. I'm not an art historian. My interest in art comes from different tangential approaches. My own personal interest has been in Buddhist meditation, but also because I have a previous business background in trade networks and how they facilitated the spread of Buddhism across not just India, but across Asia. And in the spread of Buddhism, art plays an extremely important role, because even now, as we know, art inspires all of us with its great beauty and the kind of opportunity it gives for expression of something within us which oftentimes words cannot capture very effectively. So we are going to be together for 2 full days. That's a long time. I hope you all will be able to bear with me, and some of you may know much more than me on some particular aspect. Feel free to contribute. I would be very happy. All right. So somebody's phone. These are some of the terms that we will be looking at when we discuss the Buddhist art throughout the 2 days. I'll just take you through them very quickly for the introduction. One of it, I will be sharing these PowerPoints, so no need to take pictures. No need to take pictures. It's all right. I'm leaving the PowerPoint here, right? It's more important you pay attention to what I'm saying. One of the most important aspects of the spread of Buddhism, even during the time of the Buddha, is patronage. Yeah, by patronage we mean support. In the Buddha's time, we know that the first patron, who was the first patron? It was King Bimbisara, right? He gives the donation of the Venuvana, right? So you give some place for the bhikkhus to rest, to meditate. You create suitable conditions, and most importantly, later on, also as they stopped dwelling in the forests, when they settled down in viharas, and viharas started coming up, the construction costs, and then also the regular requirements, including food and monks' robes and medicines and things that they needed to go about their job in a more suitable way. So patronage is a theme that we will look at throughout the 2 days. The other, like I mentioned in the beginning, is trade routes. Buddhism, as you know, originates in very, very ancient times, 6th century BC in India. At any point, to go from here to there, we need a road. We need a road. If there is no road, there is no communication between two communities, point A, point B. And from the most ancient times, man had been trading his surplus with communities at a distance, and there were trade routes. In India, there was one in the north which was called the Uttarapatha, and in the south, the Dakshinapatha. When I say a route, it's not just one road, it was a network of roads. These roads facilitated trade, they facilitated movement of monks. What happens when you have a route is also that you have resting places at intervals, so that you can have some food, you can have some water, there are trees, and there is a small village community where maybe you can sell your wares. So the trade routes in India, first of all, facilitated the spread within India, and then we will see in Asia both overland and maritime. By maritime, I mean the sea routes. They were an important factor in the spread of Buddhism, and along with it, the traditions and the influences of the artistic community. Third thing we will look at is materiality. This is particularly important in the early Indian context because, as we will see later on, across India we have what are called rock-cut caves. Now these are caves which are dug out of the mountainside. They are not naturally occurring caves. And they were built as donations to the Sangha, either by kings who patronized, also by wealthy merchants. And it's very strange because at that time, if you look back at that time, Indians did not live in stone buildings. They probably used wood. We will see why the conjecture of wood, and something like adobe or wooden or thatch roofs. But because the monks were itinerant, they were traveling up and down, they felt it would be, more facilitating if they had permanent dwellings that didn't get washed away or damaged by our as you know, we have very strong monsoons in India. Also, when you dig caves in the hillside, they tend to be much cooler inside because of the stone. So we will take a look at materiality, not just in the, I will be touching upon architecture a little bit because it is the context in which this art is to be found, and then the materiality of the art itself. Stylistic features we will examine when we see them. The religious context. Here, one very important aspect today, since we are looking at India, we will find that in the Indian context, the patrons were not necessarily all Buddhist kings. Sometimes, very often actually, they were Hindu kings, Brahmin kings, but they supported not just Buddhism, but Jainism and other traditions as well. So there was a kind of multi-religious ethos, and in that context, there was also the tradition of dana. We will look at dana throughout. Dana, as you know, is the first parami. Yes, and on the spiritual path, we practice dana. Why? Because it allows us to extend the boundaries of ourself and to sort of start dissolving that boundary and include other people within it, right? So when I give, if I give something which I don't need, is not dana, is not good dana, yeah? I should give something which is valuable. And so we find throughout Buddhist literature the importance of dana. Why? Because Buddhism, eventually on the path, you have to give up the notion of self. And where is the notion of self embedded? Not just within my physical body and my ideas of myself, it is also my possessions. So tomorrow, if somebody is my sister and she asks me, "Oh, can I take your ring and wear it?" Of course, no problem. But if my neighbor's friend says, "Oh, can I take your ring and wear it?" I have a problem. No, thank you. Maybe to next time, right? So we make distinctions. We have a circle which is me and my own, right? That's my family. And gradually, what I give here, what I give there, what I give there makes a big difference. The end of the path, there should be no difference at the end of the path. So how do we go about doing this? Dana is very important. And you will find throughout this dana is of course linked to the patronage that is offered to Buddhism. And in a more practical sense, in a more mundane sense, dana was what also allowed the bhikkhus to go on leading their spiritual lives, because somebody had to support. The community had to support. The bhikkhus were not engaged in any economic activity, and they had to go seeking alms for their food. So dana is also, in the religious context, one very, very important element. We'll look at other aspects later. Then narrative literature. What is narrative literature? It is stories of the Buddha. The Vinaya is full of stories. We also have stories in the Jatakas, as you know. And later on, we have the Avadanas in the Sanskrit literature. You have biographical writings about the Buddha. Throughout Buddhist history, throughout any religious history actually, at the lay people, it is the stories which are very inspiring. So traditionally, in India, a temple would be the kind of meeting place in the evenings. People would sit under the tree, there would be oil lamps lit, and stories would be told. And in India, as you know, we have very great storytelling tradition. So we have two very famous epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. And the Buddhist tradition is not far from its this kind of influence of the storytelling. And these stories also serve to, it's a little boring if I say that, oh, in Buddhism we have to practice dana, shila, khanti. Okay. But if I tell a story about the Buddha in his life, how, maybe in previous life, what did he do? And in the story, the message comes in a way in which all of us can relate. And stories are also stimulation to our imagination. And if you can think about how it must have been at that time, in the evenings when you sit with oil lamps, there is a very famous theatre personality who passed away recently in India. He wrote some of the most extraordinary plays, and he said something which was actually very important. He says electricity destroyed our imagination. Because he said in the villages when he was young, when the oil lamp was lit, and in the flickering of the oil lamp, the shadows, and some dark, some light, and the story, it became even more dramatic, you could feel the presence of the asuras and the devas and all of the drama that was going on. So storytelling is extremely important, and it is these stories that touch people's hearts. When your heart is touched, you make a connection with the tradition and you get engaged with it. So narrative literature across Buddhist tradition has very deep influence on Buddhist art. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is who made these works of arts, and we'll touch upon it later more. But in India we had what we call artisan guilds. I don't know if we understand the term. A guild is like a union, a group of people who work and study under a master, and they go and they practice their craft. And we can see the impact because there is a certain continuity in that region of a certain style. And I would just like to share, there is Professor Charles Williman. He's a scholar of Chinese Buddhism. He has translated a text which is preserved in Chinese. We have lost it in the Sanskrit. The Sanskrit name translates as Pratima Lakshana. Pratima Lakshana, Pratima, image, Lakshana, Lakhana, we all know. And that text gives the dimensions of the Buddha image. Very detailed measurements. So the measurement from the edge of the eye to the ear, his earlobes are long, so how long they should be, the chest, the length of the arms, the fingers, his eye is half open, then how big the gap must be. So essentially, if it's like a manual, So if the artisan took a block of stone and he followed these instructions, what would result would be the Buddha image, right? So there was Because today when we stand and we look at an image and we say, aha, this is Buddha. How do we know this is Buddha? Because there are certain characteristics that we identify. Of course, in India, very interestingly, we must note that at the time of the Buddha, there were several other religious teachers. The most famous being Mahavir, as we know him today. Yes, Nigantanathaputa from the Pali texts. Jainism. He is the founder of Jainism. And if you see the images of Mahavir and if you see the images of the Buddha, quite similar. Quite similar. Sometimes difficult to tell if you don't see it in a Jaina temple, if you just see it somewhere. Because the traditions were very similar. The two traditions were extremely similar. They arise in the same region. Scholars feel that Mahavir was maybe 50 years or so senior to the Buddha. It is a Shramana tradition. It has a monastic sangha. There are bhikkhunis ordained in the sangha, but doctrinally somewhat different, because in Jainism, although they do not accept the notion of a creator God, there is the idea of a soul. So those are artisan guilds, and one extremely important part we will see throughout today's presentations is that Buddhist art, actually the recovery of Buddhist art and architecture, has been a very, very important source for us in India to find out our own Buddhist history. All right? Why? As some of you know, Buddhism disappears in India. After, actually, Xuanzang comes in the 7th century and he already records decline in some monasteries. He records them as being empty or very few bhikkhus. And by the 12th century, Pala dynasty, yes, the end of that in eastern India. But Buddhism, certainly after 14th century, there is only a few pockets which survive, some in the northeast and some in the Kashmir, Leh-Ladakh area in Kashmir. And it was not until the British came to India, so very, very long absence in our historical records. Indians as a race don't have much efficiency in recording history. The Chinese were very, very particular. So Chinese records, the pilgrims' journals as they traveled through the country, and then the enthusiasm of the British to try and figure out the culture of this country which they had come and conquered. So most notable recovery was of Emperor Ashok. In India we had forgotten Ashok. And it was the British who found his edicts at various places and started wondering about this king who calls himself Devanam Piyadasi. That's what he calls himself in the edicts, the beloved of the gods. And it's not only that they recover Ashok and the memory of Ashok, they also, it is James Princip, a British person who deciphers the Brahmi script so that then we could read what was written in these inscriptions. So with that little introduction, let's go forward into the topic for this morning. There are a lot of images that I'm sharing. If at any point you have a question or you would like to make some contribution, feel free to interrupt. I enjoy taking detours in my lectures, and as long as we are all enjoying the detour, it's fine. But do try to keep your contribution meaningful. Some of the things you might want to know, I may not know. I will be honest enough to say, okay, I need to go back and check, and I come and tell you tomorrow, or maybe I write you an email. All right? So here we go. This is the first big patron of Buddhism across the country is Ashoka, and that dynasty is called the Maurya dynasty. It is founded by Chandragupta Maurya. I'll be sharing the PowerPoint, so yeah, feel free. So Chandragupta Maurya and his son Bindusara, we don't really know the extent of their kingdom, but it is estimated that Chandragupta comes all the way across to Bactria and defeats the Greeks. Some of you who are students of history will know that Alexander the Great, at the age of 30, he sets out from Greece and he comes down, he defeats the Persians, and he came all the way into what is now sort of North Afghanistan and the Indus area. And his army was exhausted, and the legend is that the horses were getting spooked because they hadn't seen elephants, and the Indians used elephants in warfare, and they refused to fight, and so Alexander doesn't come really all the way into India. He retreats back, but he does leave Greeks in a region which they call Bactria. So there were these Bactrian Greeks managing the outlying areas of his dominion, and Chandragupta defeats them and sends them packing, is what we are told. But really it is Ashok who expands the kingdom all across the subcontinent. Now we have information about Ashok in Buddhist literature. So we have a lot about him in the Mahavamsa, the Pali, the Theravada, Sri Lankan Chronicle in Pali, and there is a text called the Divyavadana, which is written in Sanskrit, which has one component on Ashok called the Ashokavadana. And this is the extent of Ashoka's kingdom. In the east, any of you familiar with Indian geography? On the east, we have a state called Assam, where a lot of the tea comes from, and it extended. So Pataliputra, his capital, is here. This is the old Magadhan kingdom here. The Buddha lived and taught in this area. From here, the kingdom expands to cover most of the subcontinent. Pakistan and Afghanistan are here. So Ashoka's empire, he was truly the first emperor in India, governed over a vast area, and his edicts are found all across this region. So you may know the story that it is after he captures this region, which is called Kalinga, a modern day Orissa, where the war resulted in all wars do, in the death of hundreds of thousands of people. And when he saw the injured, the wounded were wailing, and the dead, the families of the dead, the women, the children, so much crying, so much grief, the stench of blood, and so he has this moment of revulsion, extreme revulsion at what this has led to, and so this is recorded as his moment of conversion to the Dhamma. And he does write in his inscriptions that from now on, if I conquer anybody, it will be with the Dhamma. It will not be with these kind of violent means. And Ashok turns out to be truly an emperor ahead of his times, because throughout his kingdom, first thing is he built roads. And along the roads, he planted trees so that travelers may have shade. He made arrangements for digging wells so that, because India is hot, like here, and we need water all the time. We Indians drink a lot of water. And so he made arrangements so that people may travel, and we're talking 3rd century BC. Ashoka is supposed to have ascended to the throne either in 268 to 272 in that time. And his edicts in this region, interestingly, they are, okay, so across the country, we had a writing system. It was in Brahmi. Some of you may know Brahmi. If you don't, it's an easy script to study. It is worthwhile studying because it uncovers a lot of information about ancient Indian Buddhist history. Yeah, because there are inscriptions across in the caves as well, all in Brahmi. But in this region, you have a script which is called Kharoshti. And Kharoshti is written from right to left, and the language of the scripts, the edicts in this area is often, there is a bilingual one actually in Greek and Aramaic. So they knew the communities that were traveling and intermingling there, and so he wanted to make sure that his message goes across to all the people that are within his kingdom. Now, interestingly, Ashok's own journey to Buddhism, like I said, comes with this revulsion at the war and at the horror of war. But there seems to have been a tradition within the family, because Chandragupta Maurya, the founder, according to Jaina tradition, so he was Jain, he was a follower of Jainism, and according to the Jaina tradition, he gives up his throne in his old age, relinquishes the throne, goes to South India to a place called Shravan-Belgola, which is a very famous place of Jain pilgrimage, and there he practices the Jaina tradition of Santhara, which is when you're old, you just give up the body by going into a fast, and you essentially fast to death, fast yourself to death. So Chandragupta Maurya was a Jaina, so was probably Bindusara, but Ashok's own mother Dharma, she is supposed to have been Ajivika. Anybody knows Ajivikas here? We read about them in the 6 heterodox schools, right? Now, although Ashok writes all these inscriptions, there is also something else he does. These are an example of possibly the earliest rock-cut caves in India. These are caves, again you can see this is a massive rock and the cave has been dug into the rock. These caves he donates to the Ajivika sect. And I'm just going to show you a picture of the cave which is to the far right, that is known as the Lomas Rishi cave. One is a picture which was taken by the British when they found it, and this is how it is today. And you will recognize this motif, this sort of arch becomes very, very popular in Buddhist architecture. Right? It is a theme which, this is where we first find it. The Mauryans worked with the stone, and they had an incredible technique of polishing stone. This particular capital, it is our national emblem, and the Dharma Chakra is there in the center of the Indian flag. This is the inverted lotus base and the 4 lions on top. You will see even in the next one, on this pillar there are 6 edicts, and there is a close-up of one of the edicts. You can see how it shines. Thank you. There have been some theories about how they did this and whether they used fine grains of sand or fine stone to rub and polish this, but you have to see it with your own eyes because it is now almost 2,500 years old. but it looks new. It looks so incredibly, beautifully finished even now. So just a short a story from my own life. When I first went to Sarnath Museum, where the capital and the pillar is, it's right there at the entrance as you walk in. And I was with a colleague, and we were both staring at it, and we could not believe, it looks like this. It just looks like this. And we were staring at it, and I said to her, this must be a replica, because the real one is so ancient. They must be keeping it locked up inside somewhere, and this must be, a replica. Museums often do that. And so there was a gentleman behind us listening to us discussing this, and he says, he joins our conversation, and he said, no, madam, this is the original. And we both turned and looked at him, couldn't believe, and I said, sir, how do you know? Because there was nothing written or anything there. Indian museums can be quite scary like that. They put up something so beautiful and nothing written. So I looked at him and I said, sir, how do you know? And he smiled and he said, oh, I'm the museum director. So it's quite incredible, to see this, because it looks like somebody just did a nice varnish. And you know how we clean our houses when guests come and everything is spick and span and so shiny. The Mauryan polish, so that you will find plenty of articles about how even the Greeks and the Persians polished their sculptures, and possibly because of the connections in that region, this is how they had it. We don't know really. These are all speculations that I'm not able to comment on right now. But it's quite an incredible feat, considering we are looking at 3rd century BC. The other thing that Ashok does, many things happened in that were very important for later Buddhist history during Ashok's time. So for example, that there was a Sangiti, the third council in Ashok's time. It is said that he offered such lavish patronage to Buddhism that many lazy people thought, oh, this is a good idea, and they became monks. And then it was found that in this monastery, for 7 years, they had not followed Uposat, because some not very good people had joined the Sangha. So Ashok takes lessons from his teacher, and then he becomes the purifier of the Sangha. He goes to the monastery and he takes the test of the monks, and those who he feels are not good enough, who did not know their Buddhism very well, off you go. And so he banished several of these monks, and that is when he tells his teacher Moguliputta Tissa to hold the council. In that council, because by the time of Ashoka, already many schools had emerged in India. Ashoka's dates with respect to the Buddha's parinirvana, we have either 218 in the Pali tradition, or we have 100 years according to the other records. Indians are generally argumentative, all right? Even now, the argumentative nature of the Indian is very common. If you tell an Indian, keep it like this, then first of all, he starts thinking why he should not do it like that. So this tendency to discuss, to debate, was very much there even in the time of the Buddha. The Buddha convinces his opponents about the Dharma. How? By engaging in debate. Right? So in the Buddha's text, the debates are very civil, and the Buddha, engages the other person, asks him questions, shows him where his own contradictions lie, and then converts them to the Dhamma. But generally, people can have sometimes very vigorous and animated discussions. And the Buddha's Dharma, Buddha taught many things at many different locations in the 45 years. Sometimes over here, the 12 Dwadasha Nidana, the 12 links of dependent origination, you'll find all 12 links. Sometimes you find 4, 5. Sometimes you find up to 6 anuloma, patiloma, both, right? So he teaches with different methods in different places. So it's possible for people to listen to this and not that, and then have some ideas, which is why in the Indian religious tradition, the commentary is extremely important. We take recourse to the commentarial tradition. Why? Because it takes a look at the entire picture and draws out all of the answers. But this tendency, nevertheless, within the Indian communities to discuss, to debate, and to disagree had resulted already by the time of Ashoka into 18 schools. Some other records give as many as 26 schools. At the council, those who agreed with the orthodox position declared themselves the Vibhajavada. Vibhajavada is a very good term. The Buddha calls himself Vibhajavada, right? So Vibhajavada is the orthodoxy, and the ones who were defeated are called the Sabbativada, Sarvastivada mainly. They go to Mathura and eventually they go on to occupy Kashmir. So in Ashok's time, there is this sort of formulation of the orthodoxy, and there is also then the relics, the distribution of the relics, and very important contribution of Ashoka. We know from the Buddhist texts that after his parinirvana, after the Buddha's cremation, his relics were divided into 8. Right, were given to 7 kingdoms and 1 to the Shakya community themselves. So Ashok is said to have opened the relics and distributed them in 84,000 different stupas that he said he would build. Why 84,000? Anybody? It's a very important number in Buddhism. The Buddha teaches the Dhamma in 84,000 ways. And when Ashok finds out that 84,000 ways, he immediately makes this decision, I'm going to build 84,000 stupas. And then of course there is all this legend, beautiful legends that he wanted them all to be finished on one day, and they halt the sun from rising, and it's all completed in one night, and then the next day there are 84,000 stupas. But essentially what Ashok did was distributed the relics to several more places. One of them is to this stupa, which is known as the Great Sanchi Stupa. Anybody been to Sanchi? Nobody has been to Sanchi. Anybody been to India? Oh my God. And not been to Sanchi. Okay. I write your name in my little black book. Okay, so on this side you will see this is a picture of what is at the core of the stupa. At that time it would have been brick clad. How do we know this brick cladding technique? Because at Sarnath is just outside the city of Banaras. That is where in the deer park the Buddha gives his first sermon. Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta is delivered at Sarnath. Over there Ashoka builds the Dhammeka Stupa. You can see the brick cladding. It is beautiful. It is exquisite. And so at the core is this brick cladding. At some point, of course, the Mauryan dynasty, after Ashoka, there are some more kings, but there is a decline. And Brihadratha, one of the kings, is assassinated by his own general, Pushyamitra Shunga. And then you have the rise of the Shungas. Now, the Shunga period is very strange. Initially, although they take over the Mauryan kingdom, most scholars today feel that they did not control the entire territory, because in different parts you find different coinages and different things that have been produced by the local people showing their own autonomy. The Shungas were not not in favor of Buddhism. They did not support Buddhism. And still, in the Shunga period, you find at various places in India, great rise of Buddhist art. One of the first things that happened, so we call it the Shunga period because we don't know whether the dynasty, the kings themselves supported this, but there were people within the nobility or the general populace who made donations during that time, so we tend to call it the Shunga period art. What the Shungas did is they extended the diameter of the great Sanchi Stupa to what it is today. And they did this by cladding it in stone. They built railings, and today you have what looks like this. And this is quite an incredible piece of architecture and also of art, as you will see. These gates were added later. A torana, anybody familiar with the term torana? Yeah. So it's even today, if for example there would be a puja in my house, then I would hang at the door a floral torana. It's like an entranceway which is decorated, and it's like an auspicious welcome into the inside. So these gates were built, and as you can see, there is a lot of work over here. There are animals. There is typically you will find the lion, the bull, the elephant, and the horse. The four, even in Sri Lanka you find them. These animals are of course important in the life of a king, and the Buddha is also a king. He is a Chakravarti. He is a Dhamma Chakravarti. Just one detail gives you an here. So we are looking at this is an image. This is a detail from the other side of this torana. So you can see lots of figures there. So this is on the other side. There is this part. This is a stupa. We will come to this, and many people adoring and worshipping the stupa. When you look at the people closely, Indians did not wear clothes like this. They are depicting foreigners also. Please remember, in Ashoka's time, because his foreigners, I mean non-Indian races, because his kingdom extended all the way into what is Pakistan, Afghanistan, and there was a lot of intermingling. We will see again tomorrow. The Gandharan area had a lot of influence also from Central Asia, and because there was trade, because there were trade networks, there were people who also got introduced to the Buddha's teachings, and they too worshipped the Buddha. This is another gate, and you can see this particular idea of yakshas supporting pillars. This we see even in Thai temples, no? They stand in a line like that, yeah? So supporting this idea, and this is a more complete torana. You can see all this is stone. This is carved in stone. The railing is carved in stone. It's not stones fitted together. So this is where in Sanchi you have the Buddha's relics interred by Ashoka. The other important stupa in Sanchi is what is called stupa number 3. In this, the British found the relics of Venerable Sariputta and Moggallana. They were interred here. Everyone knows about Sariputta and Moggallana? Yes. So their relics were found here. This is a drawing by Alexander Cunningham, and after they took these relics to the UK, of course, and then there was some problem. There was a war, and then they had to be stored somewhere safe, and then they couldn't be found again, and there was a whole mess. There is a whole story about how some of our most precious things go somewhere else, right? that is a theme we will look at when we discuss even the Chinese Buddhist art. All right, taking off from this theme, this one, people worshipping at a stupa. Brings us to the idea that I want to discuss next, which is, where do we find the first Buddha image in India? Is a very big question. Why? Because if you look at the art that we have today, the earliest Buddhist art does not depict the Buddha in human form. You will find he is worshipped in the form of a stupa. You will find the Bodhi tree. You will find an empty throne. You will find the Dhammachakra. You will also find Buddhapada. You understand Buddhapada? The footprints of the Buddha. They become objects of worship. One theory is that one theory is that because the Buddha has gone into parinirvana, he has no human form anymore and he can only be depicted symbolically. There has been a lot of writing between scholars arguing for and against this. These various theories. So I can send you all some papers if you all are interested on the whole debate between iconism and aniconism. Actually, aniconism is a term I don't agree with, because you do have an icon. You have a tree. You have a symbol of some sort. It's just not the anthropomorphic depiction of the Buddha. And so we will look at some of these aniconic depictions. And then by the 2nd century, you start finding images of the Buddha in India. And we don't want to get into the debate on which one is first, but it occurs almost simultaneously. One is in the Gandharan region. Gandhara is an area in the northwest of Pakistan. We'll see it on the map a little later. And it also there is a Mathura school. Mathura is a town near Delhi. So it is in that. Mathura was a very strong old Buddhist location. And it is over there that we also find very early Buddha images. The question that comes is, when you start first seeing the Buddha in human form, what was there just before it? How did the Buddha come into human form? Was there a build-up of icons? We don't seem to have, when something emerges, we also know the nidanas, right? There is something that is leading to causing this. We don't have enough information on what leads to this stage of iconism, which then takes root all across India. So some of the contributors, these are the Shungas, again, like I had mentioned before. We look at some, and this is an example of their art. They worked a lot with terracotta, and you can see how absolutely graceful and heavily decorated, and the features are rounded, but you can see from this what kind of hair, what kind of jewelry, what kind of style was prevailing in society at that time. And it is based on these kind of depictions that you have also the Buddhist development of art. And there is a stupa, a very old stupa called the Bharut stupa, where today at the site in Madhya Pradesh there are only ruins. Everything from Bharut stupa that was found is in Kolkata Museum. And because it was all in a state of disrepair, over here you will see the Buddha is being venerated at the Vajrasana. You all know the Vajrasana? Ashoka makes a seat at Bodh Gaya, and he says this is where the Buddha meditated, and he calls it the Vajrasana, the diamond throne. At the Bharut Stupa, you find people venerating at the Vajrasana. Buddha is not in human form. On the right is the actual Vajrasana at Bodh Gaya when it was discovered by Alexander Cunningham. Alexander Cunningham simply walked on the path of Xuanzang, not literally, but he followed Xuanzang's diary, and he discovered many of our ancient Buddhist sites, including, of course, the wonderful monastery of Nalanda. So this Vajrasana is there. Of course, it's in a much better state now, restored at Bodh Gaya. Anybody been to Bodh Gaya? Very few people. Okay, so next time I take my lectures in India, and all of you after that we go and see these sites. Bodh Gaya is extremely precious now for all Buddhists, and the tree is there, and this is the Vajrasana. Here is another image. Now this image, people are worshipping at the stupa, and this is actually what scholars have realized is this is a depiction of Bharut Stupa. There was a depiction of the big stupa in the stupa itself. So although the big stupa is not there, we have a fairly good idea of what Bharut looked like because of this particular panel. These are all examples from Bharut. People venerating at the, what is this? The Machakka, no? Venerating, you can see they are offering, these are garlands. They have hung garlands over here, over here. Yeah. And here we have the tree, the Bodhi tree. The Bodhi tree is venerated. Why? You know, it stands there behind the Buddha in all of that long night of his enlightenment. It is in the shade of the tree. And if you go to Bodh Gaya, you will find those various locations where he spent the 7 weeks after enlightenment. There is one spot where he just stood and he gazed at the tree. He just gazed at the tree. And so the tree is venerated. It was almost like this solid companion that he had, a sort of, firm anchor in his journey, his whole churning. The night of the Buddha's enlightenment is a lot of churning. And, the whole episode of the attack of Mara, right? Mara's army, the beasts, then Mara's daughters attempt to seduce him, and then eventually he touches the earth, the Bhumi Sparsha, and he says the earth will bear witness to my achievement, right? And so the tree is venerated as a symbol of the Buddha. Here again we have the Dhammacakra in a very different form, and the garlands are hung on the spoke. Any questions so far? Anybody have anything to contribute? Okay, so I'll carry on. This is another panel from Bharut, and what you can't see very clearly is here. This is the Buddha's hair, depicting the worship of the Buddha's hair after it has been, he cuts his hair and then it is preserved and it is worshipped. An example not from Bharut, we have these aniconic versions all across the country. Amaravati is in the south of India. There is an empty throne. And behind is depicted, well, we call it a pillar of radiance, as in the radiance of the Buddha's spiritual power. And they are venerating in front of the seat. You have the empty seat even in Mathura. Mathura, you will find they like to work in red sandstone quite a lot. And this one, this is in a cave complex which is within Mumbai city. Within Mumbai city is in a hillside, we have about 100 Buddhist caves. It's a fantastic complex. Kamheri caves goes back almost to 2nd century BC. Some scholars say maybe a little later, maybe 2nd century AD, but still when you're looking back, it's almost 2000 years old, and the complex was added to continuously till the 8th and 9th century AD. In the oldest section of the complex, this is the top of a pillar, and can you see this is the tree? Is that clear? But what is interesting is, this is the seat in front of the tree. It's like a throne, and these two things, I'm not sure in this light whether they are very clear, so I'm sharing they are Buddha Pada. They are marks of the Buddha's footprints. So in this one you have the tree, the throne, and the Buddha's footprints on the throne, which become the objects of worship. Coming now to the anthropomorphic depiction of the Buddha, this may or may not be the first one. In the north of Afghanistan, archaeologists in the 70s, Soviet and Iranian ones I think, they discovered, do we understand the term necropolis? It's where all the dead are buried. And there was lots of gold that had been buried with the dead people. Amongst the, so Tilya Tepe is the place, the necropolis, and they found this coin. Now what is interesting about the coin is, on one side there is a man rolling the wheel, on the other side there is a lion, there is an inscription on both sides. Now if you see this sign in India is used across the country to depict the Tri Ratna. We know the Tri Ratna, Buddha Dhamma Sangha, the 3 jewels. This sign is used in various other places as a sign of the Tri Ratna. So very clearly a Buddhist motive. And the inscription with the lion, it says, the lion who dispels fear. The Buddha is also metaphorically, his teachings are referred to as the lion's roar, Sihanada. Yes, we have the Chakravati Sihanada Sutta. So the Buddha is also a lion, right? Even physically, when he is described, his grace and the way in which he walks, he is like the lion. So there is a lion, and the inscription where this man is rolling the wheel, it says Dharma Pravartako. The ko we have to add, yeah. So it could be, possibly one of the earliest. Then we have another instance very early. This is a reliquary. It is called the Boomerang reliquary. It was discovered in Afghanistan. It is today in the British Museum. So in a stone, inside a stone casket was this gold reliquary. It's about 6 or 7 centimeters high, and although the inscription on the casket said it has the Buddha relics, inside there were some gemstones, and there were 4 coins of a Shaka king. Shakas are what the Europeans call the Scythians and the Chinese call the Sai. They were a Central Asian race, and they came across to this side and they ruled there. So it is the king's coins, and what is interesting is this. So this is carved in gold, and there are garnets, gemstones there, And on both sides, so on this hemispheric circle, you have the Buddha in the middle, and all early depictions of the Buddha in India have Brahma on one side, generally depicted as an old man, and on the other side you have Indra, Shakra. You know that after enlightenment, Shakra also comes to greet him. Indra in the Indian religious context is the king of all the gods in heaven. He is the king. So he is an important personage, and in the Buddhist tradition, although there is no creator god, Hindu gods are sort of co-opted into the tradition. They become very active. It is, after all, Brahma. When the Buddha attains nirvana, he has no desire to teach, because now there is nothing left for him to do. He went on a quest, he found what he wanted, and he wants to pass away. So the story goes that Brahma sees this and appears before him and says, "No, you must teach." And in the Pali tradition, we know this story, right? Buddha says, "My teaching is so subtle, nobody will understand it. And it will be very difficult, very frustrating for me to try to teach this." But Brahma says to him, "No, there are some people who have only little dust in their eyes. Their eyes are not fully covered with dust, only little dust. They will be able to understand." And so the Buddha takes a look at the world and to all the suffering beings, and that moment when he gets up and begins his teaching career is that moment of great compassion of the Buddha, right? Because actually he had finished everything he wanted to do. But he spends the next 45 years. The Buddha attained enlightenment at 35, and he taught for 45 years in that region which I showed you, which is in and around today's Bihar and eastern UP. And the texts tell us that he did not stay in one place for more than 2 or 3 days. He was constantly walking, and it is only during Vasavasa, during the monsoons, that he stayed in the one location for the 3 months. So coming back to this, Buddha in the center, Brahma on one side, Indra on the other, and the same is repeated in the back. And at the two ends, there are also bodhisattvas. This is, now we'll take a look at some Mathura art. Anybody got the time? My watch is, how much time do I have?
11.
It's already 11? No. 1 hour. Okay, good. Just warn me when so this is one of the early images of the Buddha, and here you will find on that side, this side is Vajrapani. The bodhisattvas are already making an appearance. He's holding the Vajra in his hand, you can see, and on the other side is Padmapani. Padmapani eventually becomes the same as Avalokiteshvara. There is a journey, Padmapani, Lokeshvara, Avalokiteshvara, right? A journey of that figure in art and in the storytelling. In the bottom here, this is lions. When you see lions sitting, then the Buddha is sitting on the lion throne. Sometimes he sits on the lotus throne. This is for an Indian Buddha, a little bit now when we look back, rather strange. You see the hair coiled as if, this is, I will tell you why it looks a little strange. When we come to the Gupta period, where you see the definitive image that has then become, that resonates throughout the tradition. So we'll come back to this Buddha. But Mathura produced some incredible pieces of art. In this panel, on the right side, this is Mahamaya giving birth. He is emerging from the side. As you know, the Buddha, she held the tree and he was born from the side. This is Buddha attaining enlightenment, Bhumi Sparsha Mudra. And when the Buddha holds, this is, does everyone know the mudras? So Bhumi Sparsha, he touches the ground. Yeah. And that why does he touch the ground? Because Mara says to him, you know, you're doing all this in the thick forest. Who is going to know? Nobody is going to know about whatever you have attained here. And the Buddha says, go away, Mara. The earth will bear witness. And he touches the earth, and then there's supposed to have been a lot of rumbling and some earthquakes, and very dramatic, and Mara is banished. And when he, here in this hand, so he holds the robe like this. This mudra is called the Vyakarana mudra. It is the prediction mudra. He always predicts his own enlightenment. We come to this panel. This is the where he's teaching, and this part, Mahaparinirvana, right? So you have these episodes. Now, does anyone know what the middle episode is? Yeah.
Landing from Kusita to Sankasya.
Yes. Yes. Would you like to tell the story? So the Buddha's mother, the birth mother, she passes away a week after he's born, and then of course she is a great being herself, which is why she's given birth to such a special baby. So she is reborn in Tusita heaven. Now, and then of course his father marries her sister Mahapajapati Gautami, and she becomes like his own real mother. Anyway, so after the Buddha attains enlightenment, he realizes that his mother missed out on his teachings. So he goes up to Sita heaven and he teaches her there. When he comes down, he sort of gives a summary of those teachings to Sariputta, and that is the origin of the Abhidhamma in the Pali tradition. So in art, they have these three ladders. There is a Buddha, there is Brahma and Indra. They go up the ladder to Tusita heaven and then come back down after the teachings are given. So this is what I meant when there is a story, right? How it inspires the artist. The story does not have a ladder. But for the artist, the Buddha has to go up somehow. How does he show him going up and coming down? And so this ladder and the Buddha going up and down the ladder, so many depictions of this across the country. Really very, very beautiful and very evocative. Even the Parinirvana, somebody is throwing their hands up in grief. There are many depictions of grief when he passes away. We will see more of that. This is when in Mathura the Buddhist image comes, I said, almost at the same time as Gandhara. And you find these niches and the Buddha sitting there. This is the Dhyana Mudra. One hand upon the other, the meditation mudra. In this you will notice something very particular. In this one, the Buddha's robe is on one shoulder, right? Even here, you see it is on two shoulders. This becomes a tradition of the northwest of India. This sort of depiction of both shoulders covered. You will find it in the next one. This is actually a very fantastic image, and you can see how they are attempting to display the robes of the Buddha, and his chest is really big. You know, he's probably breathing and doing some anapanasati, or the focus of the first thing that comes when you look at this, the expanded chest, breath, right? And normally in this sort of in the left hand he would probably be holding the robe, but this sort of an image, the right hand is in Abhaya Mudra. We understand Abhaya, have no fear. What is there to fear? On the Buddhist path, what is there to fear? You're sitting and meditating, you're being good, and what is there to fear? Buddha is in Abhaya Mudra for many depictions. Why? Any idea? What is the greatest fear? Yeah? Yeah? Huh? Death, yeah. Loss of one's. And what are you doing when you're practicing meditation? You're letting go of, you're supposed to let go of the notion of self. And that, on the path, it can be extremely frightening. We navigate through this world in our ordinary lives with a very clear sense of self. And if we just think self means the ego and my pride, ahankara, no, that's not just self. Self is more than that. Self is my idea of myself as an Indian, maybe superior to the Pakistanis. You know, my idea as a Hindu or my idea as a Buddhist, my idea of myself as maybe Mahayana Buddhist, Mahayana, we all have self. Theravada Buddhist, the earliest teaching, the only teaching, these are all ideas of self. How to give up all this? How to give it up? My notion of myself as a man or as a woman. Right? Ultimately, it is the destruction of everything that you identify yourself with. You need Buddha over there all the time. Abhaya. So the mudras have, how does the art convey? Today morning, Achan Prayut was asking me to dwell on this. How does the art convey the teachings? What is there to be afraid of? Are we afraid of sickness and death? Not really, because it happens only to other people. It's coming for us soon, if not already. So oftentimes when I teach, sometimes young students, they are very intelligent, and they ask us, this whole story of the Buddha seeing the sick man, the old man, the dead man, the four sights, right? So if he was 29 years old, somebody must have fallen sick in the family, no? Maybe he himself got fever, or his wife had a cold. His father certainly had grown old in that time. So why he is surprised? How we can believe this story? The storytelling, this is often what we call the narrator's device. It's a storytelling device that tells us what? It was not Buddha who was naive. We are naive. He understands. He understands the importance of what this life is and what death is going to do. We live every day as if we are immortal. And that is not yours truly, that is a quotation from the Mahabharata. In the Mahabharata there is a story, some of you may be familiar with the stories of the Mahabharata war, etc. Ramayana is more popular here in Thailand. So at one instance, there is this Prince Yudhishthir and his brothers, they are the good guys, but his brothers drink water from a lake which is forbidden, and they all fall down dead. And so he goes to the spirit of the lake and he begs the spirit, please make them come alive. So the spirit says, okay, I will ask you 100 questions. If you give the correct answer to every question, then your brothers will become alive. And the first question the spirit of the lake asks Prince Yudhishthir is, what is the most incredible thing on earth? And Yudhishthir says, it is the fact that knowing fully well we are going to die, we live as if we are immortal. So these are some things to dwell on. And okay, little bit too serious. So let's look at some more pictures. These now are paintings, and these are possibly the oldest paintings in Ajanta. If you notice, I have captioned this, the Satvahanas. Around the time that the Maurya dynasty declines and the Shungas take over in my side of the country, which is the western side around Mumbai and extending to the center and partly to Gujarat also, was this dynasty called the Satvahanas. They ruled from about the 1st century BC to about 2nd century AD. They were Hindu kings, but they patronized all traditions, like all kings. And so the earliest, anybody knows about Ajanta? Yes. So at Ajanta is one of the greatest marvels of this world. And you must come to India and see it. This is again what we call rock cut architecture. We will see some examples of that architecture. And this is a blossoming of art in a sort of way unparalleled across the rest of the country. And it is Buddhist art. Now in Ajanta you have about 29-30 caves. The oldest of the caves have these paintings. And I will show you some close-ups, and then you will know why this is so incredible. We are looking at 1st century BC. Look at the expressions, look at the colors. There is a whole tragedy which occurs at Ajanta. As you know, Buddhism disappeared, and in this region, Ajanta was abandoned by the 7th century AD. It is built in the forest. So the forest literally grew into the caves. And nobody knew about these caves until an Englishman was hunting in the hills, John Smith of the Madras Cavalry. And there are various stories. One, that the tiger he was chasing went down the valley, went up the other side and just disappeared somewhere. So Major John Smith, Captain John Smith chases and then finds that there is something in here. And he called all the villagers and they cut down the trees and removed a lot of the stuff, and he discovers the caves. This is about 1874. And then of course what he goes on to do is that he writes John Smith, 14th April, blah, 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 and he's written it on the chest of a bodhisattva. Anyhow, but we have him to thank for that he discovered this absolute gem that we stupid Indians had forgotten and lost to the forest. Yeah, and one very peculiar thing, when you go to Ajanta and when you see where John Smith has written his name, so today when you see it, it's like up there. So how did he write it up there? Because all this was, the forest had come in and he was standing on mud and ground and rocks, and he was writing on the chest of the bodhisattva. But coming back to these paintings, then what happened was, when the caves were discovered, everybody got very excited. The British made several drawings, and in order to sort of preserve them at that time in their wisdom, they coated it with some kind of varnish, the paintings. The varnish started affecting and it had gathered dust underneath. It started affecting the paintings, The Nizam of Hyderabad, an Indian king from the southern state, he invited some Italian conservators who then coated it with some more things, with some beeswax and some preservatives, which only started attracting more dust. And there were bats, you know bats? Mammals, flying mammals. Their dung and everything was just getting stuck. And eventually the paintings were, although they had been discovered, they were lost again because of all this efforts at conservation. And this re-clearing up is the work of one man from the Archaeological Survey of India who worked for like over a decade painstakingly because it is so fragile. This material is so fragile and it's there on the wall, right? And he used infrared rays, and it is some Japanese technology now which has allowed him to slowly reveal. Take a look at this. This is phenomenal art, possibly anywhere in the world for 1st century BC, and they're paintings. And we look at some more popular images from Ajanta. This is, so these are pictures which are from the Archaeological Survey of India. Ajanta is very difficult to photograph because it is deep inside in a cave. And although this looks so big and whatever, when you're standing, it's over there. And they don't allow photography anymore, so you have to rely on images which the government sources have taken. You remember we saw Padmapani with the Mathura Buddha? Here is Padmapani. And this is the most iconic image of Ajanta. This form, the head this way, the shoulders this way, this, we call it in India the Tribhanga. Three, Bhanga, breaking the body. It is used in dance in the sense of three. This is considered an extremely graceful pose, and this is a pose which men would hold as well as women. You know, so you can see the Tribhanga there. He is holding a lotus. There is a lot of detail in these paintings. This one, in fact, is the crown is incredibly detailed. We cannot see it in this, but there are opportunities to visit, like I keep saying. Here you have some, Ajanta is full of stories. All the paintings in Ajanta are around the Jatakas, very, very popular. Everyone knows the Jatakas, stories of the previous births of the Buddha, 547 of them. And the Jatakas are full of all kinds of creatures. And here you have musicians. This is an Apsara. Yeah? And there are flying Apsaras at Ajanta. And the motif of the flying Apsara, as we will see tomorrow, goes all the way down the silk routes to Dunhuang in China. At Sigiriya, yeah. The art at Sigiriya has a lot of, absolutely, yeah, yeah. Anyone from Sri Lanka here? Yeah, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. On the side of one of the caves at the entrance, you find Buddha. Can you all see over here? This is Yashodhara, and here there is Rahula. Buddha has attained enlightenment, so he is very big. Rahula is here. This is the band on his head. This is his face. These are his eyes. He is looking up at his father. This is Yashodhara's face, her eyes. And we wear this jewelry, we wear it in the middle, and it'll be on the sides like this. We wear it even today. And the Buddha has his bowl in his hand. This is the story of Buddha coming back to Kapilavastu to meet his family. And Yashodhara says to Rahula, go and ask him for your inheritance. And so Buddha, of course, promptly makes him also a monk. It's very beautifully depicted, and the Buddha has a kind of a halo. His head is looking down so gently, and they are, of course, only ordinary beings, so very small. This is the visit of Indra with his celestial retinue coming to meet the Buddha, to greet him after his enlightenment. And this picture shows you what it is to be inside a cave in Ajanta. These entrances are to the cells. Most actually of the caves in Ajanta are viharas. So you will find a huge cave with entrances on the side to the cells where the monks used to live. And so when you enter, in front of you will be a niche where there will be a big Buddha, and then the walls are all painted. And the Indian style of painting, this is the Mahajanaka story. Mahajanaka Jataka, anybody knows the story? Yeah, so he's a king who renounces and becomes the ascetic. The thing with this form of storytelling at Ajanta is that it's not exactly very linear. You have to look at it. Now, for example, in this, can you all see these two white things here? When you see the actual painting, there are two deer. They are listening to the ascetic, and Mahajanaka is sitting there. And over here, he comes and he tells his wife that he is leaving. He's going to become an ascetic. And over here, he leaves. So the stories are not at all in any linear sort of framework. It is all quite jumbled up. This is a detail of the Mahajanaka. You can see him telling his wife, and the women, their expressions are really beautifully captured. This one is feeling so sad. This one is horrified. They are talking about it, talking to each other. The whole painting is so alive. It is just so alive with this episode. And there he is leaving, and all the town folk, she's holding the pillar and she's looking in grief at this king who has abandoned everything and who's gone to become the ascetic. Here you can see the women in more detail. So yes, actually 1 day is not enough for Ajanta, 1 week is not enough for Ajanta, maybe one lifetime we should, because every time you go there, you discover, you see something new. This is a panel from the Vesantara Jataka. There he is and his family, they are leaving. Yes. So the Vesantara Jataka is very popular in paintings across Southeast Asia also, right? Because it is the one birth before, yes, in Thailand, one birth before he becomes Buddha. And so in the painting, while the whole thing is happening here, like we do today, if there is something going on, we're all at the window and we're looking. It's so alive, it's so real, and they're looking at this thing happening. Now that part of the panel, I haven't got a detail of that. That is where they are talking about leaving, he and his wife. But of course they leave over here. From these, one of the things that you can find from these is also the way of depiction of the construction of the places themselves, the clothes. A lot of people have done work in the earlier story of Mahajanaka. When he decides to go, just like in the life of the Buddha, there is a depiction in this story also of them arranging a dancing party to try and, make him forget. And the fabric that the dancers are wearing is a kind of fabric, a kind of weaving, ikat we call it. It is there in India even today. Right? We can identify, we can see it, and so you know how far back some things go. Now, yes?
First I want to say how thankful I am for you giving your amazing eye for us today, an eye that can connect the cultural or historical features with Indian philosophy, Indian religion in an interdisciplinary way. There are very few people who have your gift. Thank you. I have a small question. When you talked about the Jains, if I remember correctly, I believe you were referring to Gandhara as the founder of the Jains. I would prefer a different word, because as I understand Buddha, he is an archetypal form of consciousness that has appeared many times. And as I understand, Jainism
You're right.
is making the same point.
You're right.
In this eon,
No, and they are known. In the case of the Buddha's the cosmology is longer, and but you're right, Rishabhanath. Yes, thank you. And one says the word founder in a rather loose sense, in the sense of the tradition as is practiced and is alive in the current context, but not founder as in. You're right. Thank you for that. Yeah. No, not at all. So,
1 2 3 4
Yes.
5 6 7 8 9
Yes.
10 1 2 3 1
yeah.
I was at Ajanta Caves. The first impression you get is the panoramic view of the caves, and the cliff. And a lot of this is great because you can't really see it because a lot of it's dark.
Yes, go on.
But the most impressive detail was floating outside the caves. And the next time you go, I like to suggest you bring a very good quality camera, because please don't laugh, because it's not every naked eye can see. Very high quality cameras can capture what very few people can see, and that is the devas floating around the caves. The devas are in the form of very light colored balls, transparent balls floating around the caves at the mouth of the caves. And those caves that are very commercialized, that have people selling souvenirs and all that, you won't see those lights floating, those blobs of light.
Right. Thank you. I'll remember your advice. But what she is talking about also, when I had to put this presentation together, I had to leave out many things because I have limited time and I have so many things to really share. But the location of Ajanta is stunning. I'll dig up an image and I'll share it with you. So there is a river, the Vaghora River, which has cut a sort of horseshoe shape in the mountainside. And when you go there, on the opposite side of the horseshoe are these caves, and they are in a semicircle. I sort of stayed away from getting too much into the architectural aspect, but the architecture is the context for the art. So I cannot really stay away from it, and I will share some of this with you. Now, one part which I need to bring to your notice is all of these paintings which I am showing you now, these. Can you see the difference between this and the examples of the early paintings that I showed you, which had to be restored again and again? So there are two phases at Ajanta. And the caves which are actually at the center of the horseshoe, so caves 9, 10, 11 and 15, I think there are 4 or 5 caves in the center, which are the oldest caves going back to at least 1st century BC, if not 2nd. And then the second wave at Ajanta is in the 5th century. The scholar who has worked extensively on this is Walter Spink. Everybody doesn't necessarily agree with his theory, but it's fairly dramatic, and this is in the time of a dynasty. So we are now, the Mauryan dynasty is gone, the Shungas take over on that side, the Shatavahanas were here, the Shatavahanas have declined, and we have a dynasty which is called the Vakatakas. The Vakatakas were related in one generation by marriage with the Gupta dynasty. The Guptas, I will come to later, that is the golden period of Indian art. And actually like an Indian Renaissance. There was literature, there was astronomy, there was art, there was fabulous stuff in the Gupta period. So at the time of the Gupta period, in the 5th century in Ajanta, you have the dynasty known as the Vakatakas. And according to Walter Spink, the rest of the caves, so that means about 25 odd caves, were all excavated in a 20-year period between 460 to 480 AD. And this is all the patronage of one of the Vakatakas, Harishena. These were again, please remember, they were not Buddhist kings, which surprises most people elsewhere. Because we tend to think, oh, he would have been a pious Buddhist. No, they patronized all traditions. But this is a scale which is really not matched before or after in the kind of, the artistic imagination. So he really had some fantastic people working here. And how do we know this? From inscriptions, of course, yeah? So that a little bit about the Vakatakas. This is some more detail of the Vesantara Jataka, that is the wife leaving. And the women are really, really very beautifully depicted in Ajanta. This is a woman looking into a mirror. Yes?
What you say is this cave,
Mm.
making by king, right?
Yeah.
But I heard that this cave making by Mahayana monks,
Not by monks.
not monks.
No, they would have been artisans. If they were monks, we don't know. So we go by, unfortunately, history is not so romantic, no? I'm very sorry about that.
From Ajanta, and last year I have been Ajanta.
Yeah, so when you buy books from those little fellows who are selling them, be very careful. So if you're looking, I can send you a whole bibliography. So there is a German, Dieter Schlingloff. He's done a lot of work on identifying. See, the big task at Ajanta was identifying these Jatakas. And there is so many fights between scholars because they disagree. And many Jatakas have similar things happening. He becomes a monk, and the themes are very, very similar. The king, he's a king. So then and before leaving, he has a bath. He has to have a ritual bath. When you have that depiction, it can be this Jataka, that Jataka, any Jataka. So scholars, Dieter Schlingloff has worked extensively, and his publications are there. Walter Spink has worked on the history. Our own professor from India, Professor Jamkhedkar, he has done a lot of work on the Vakataka dynasty itself. So, yeah.
I think at this time, Buddhist scripture, Buddhist literature, Buddhist culture, I think very popular across the India. That's why
Yes.
he wanted to make this kind of
Yes.
amazing views.
Yes, yes. But that doesn't mean that they didn't do things on the Hindu side. Huh? We are only looking at one part of their work, so we tend to get very linear in that analysis. I'm not here. I would need a lot more time to tell you what all the Vakatakas did. So even the Satavahanas who excavate the early, in whose time the paintings are there. There is a cave complex called Junnar, about 3 hours outside Mumbai, where there are Buddhist caves. They have donated to the Buddhists. They are on the trade route. That is one more thing that tells us what? The merchants were the big supporters of Buddhism. You see, in the Hindu tradition, what happens is, because of the caste system, it is only the Brahmin who is allowed access to religious and spiritual knowledge. Right? Buddhism is much more egalitarian in that respect. And you as a monk, me as a layperson, we can both practice. And of course, in Mahayana, I can take bodhisattva vows as even a layperson and even as a woman, right? So these are all things which made the tradition immediately more appealing to several people. And the merchants, as we know from the inscriptions again. So on inscriptions, the finest work has been done, path-breaking work actually, by Gregory Chopin. Please look for his books. He has, of course, the inscriptions first had to be deciphered and read. But then he puts together and develops this whole economic theory. How did viharas sustain themselves? Who made the donations? Monasteries had monks making donations because they had wealth and they made the donation. You donate land, then what about the title to the land? All of these things, little details, they are all there in the inscriptions. So if you want to engage in that study, there is plenty of work that has been done. But your one observation is very right. One thing which I didn't dwell on doctrinally is the arising of Mahayana. We are looking at 5th century. Earliest Mahayana scriptures, 1st century BC. Prajnaparamita Sutras and Saddharma Pundarika Sutra, the Lotus Sutra and the wisdom texts, the earliest of the texts. I just wanted to share something very briefly with you all. In the tradition, there is a very clear divide. Theravada, Mahayana, and one part of Mahayana, I can see some followers of Tibetan Buddhism here, Vajrayana, right? Is an extension of Mahayana with tantric practices, including mudras, mandalas, visualizations, all that. So, the Theravada will not accept the Mahayana because Buddha did not teach this. It is not there in the early canons. Mahayana says, oh, we have Mahayana. Right? So Buddha gave us these teachings because we are the smarter people, and to the other people he gave very simple teachings. All right. But that is how it has sort of solidified the differences in history. But when we go back into the materials preserved by the various schools, so even for this I can share the work of some scholars. I will just share the main observations here. One very important fact that emerges when we study ancient Buddhist history is the initial divisions amongst the schools were because of disputes on the Vinaya. Right? So even the first schism, we know it is because they disagreed about the Vinaya. There are two different versions to the story, but never mind. After that, when you had doctrinal differences, in the terminology you find out Sarvasti Vada, Theravada. Vada denotes a doctrinal position, right? Point one. Point two, as long as Professor Frank and I follow the same Vinaya, we can be in the same monastery. Doctrinally, he might be leaning towards Mahayana, but no problem. Our Vinaya is the same, we live in the same monastery. Point two, right? Point three, when we look at Buddhist history in India, there is no separate Mahayana ordination. So who were these monks? They were from the same schools. They were not some people who had horns on their head who came up with some different ideas. No, they were from these very same schools. Right? Point four. When we look at, so next time I come, I will bring a book. It's not a very new book. There was a wonderful scholar, French scholar called André Barrault. Barrault in 1956 worked extensively on all materials available, and he has this book which is called The Schools of the Small Vehicle. It's the English translation. It's been translated into English only 2-3 years ago by a scholar called Andrew Skilton from Oxford. So Barrault's book is extremely useful because he gives the doctrinal positions of the various schools. He gives you their look where the inscriptions about them are found in India, what the Chinese pilgrims wrote. Where did the Chinese pilgrims find Mahasangika? Where did they find Mahishasaka? Where did they find Dharmottara? Right? And he gives you what are their texts which are currently available, in which languages. And then he gives an outline of their doctrinal positions. So just to give you an example, the Mahasangika, I was telling you in the beginning that the Indian mind does not rest in one teaching, right? They discussed and they elaborated it. So, for example, the Mahasangika said, it's not only at the deer park that the Buddha turns the wheel of Dharma. Buddha turned the wheel of Dharma at the deer park, but they say no, not only there. Anything that the Buddha does, he turns the wheel of Dharma. Correct? Because the Buddha and the Dharma is one. He is not different. Right? So they say anything that the Buddha does, he is turning the wheel of Dharma. Anything that the Buddha speaks is turning the wheel of Dharma. Because nothing that the Buddha does or nothing that the Buddha says is something disconnected from the Dharma. Right? And then comes an extremely beautiful limit of this kind of argument, where they say that even if the Buddha utters a single syllable, if the Buddha just says, ah, he's turning the wheel of Dharma. Because the identification of the Buddha with the Dharma is complete in all respects. Right? So this is how ideas start coming into different Buddhist schools. It leads them onwards to move away from maybe whatever is the orthodoxy which is maintained in the texts. Right? So you have Mahayana arising not just from some different people who suddenly sat up and said something different. It was from within these schools. And the final argument is, even today. Today we have 3 Vinayas being practiced, right? We have the Pali, the Theravada Vinaya. In China, it was the Dharmaguptaka Vinaya, which was generally accepted by all schools. And the Tibetans, who are Mahayana, Vajrayana, they follow the Mula Sarvastivada Vinaya. So where is Mahayana Vinaya? Where is Mahayana Vinaya? So the whole division between the traditions, which today seems so rock solid, as if the 3 traditions emerged from different independent silos. This is, when we look back at Buddhist history, then we just project what is this situation today onto history. History did not, it was not like this in history at all, right? Okay, so that much for the detour into Mahayana. Yes, somebody has a question? Sorry, you can shout, it's all right. How much time?
10, 54, 50 minutes.
5 minutes. 6 minutes. I don't know how many.
Hello.
Yes, tell me.
So I was have been impressed with your lesson. So when I look at some slide you showed us before about Ashoka
Yes.
statue and pillar. So
Yes.
I was curious, wonder myself, what does each pillar and each statue have the edit mentioned about. But anyways, I also believe that those kind of things matter. No people nobody believe that he built the pillar, he built that statue, make the people nowadays believe that he real characteristics and real Buddhism. And so what does every pillar and statue have the edit mentioned
What
about?
do they say?
Yeah, mentioned
Oh,
about
they
the
say
edit.
several things, and you will have to read a lot of books to. But mainly, he says he promotes peace. He promotes compassion. He says he, in fact, tells us how to behave in our ordinary lives. That you should respect your parents and you should love your family, including advice like that. Then he narrates his own commitment to the Dharma and the Sangha. Sometimes he tells the government officials, some of the edicts are addressed to his own government officials to tell them in what manner they must rule and how they must be equitable and there should be justice. And one of them is very interesting because in one of them he lists out some 5 or 6 texts which the monks must study. He is giving advice to the monks also. Ashoka's journey is quite impressive because on the one hand he goes to the Sangha and he takes the exam and he says, okay, you passed, you can stay. And the others, he says, no more, you cannot be monks, you go back to lay life. Yeah. And the other thing is he also gives advice on the texts which the monks must study. I think only one of them has been, they're very different names. We don't know what suttas those are. I think only one has probably been identified with the current collection, so we don't know what the collection and what the names were at that time. So he's saying many different things in many different places. Yes? Hmm. Yeah. Appamada.
Number one of second
Yeah.
versus part one.
So if you want to know about Ashoka, you can look at the Mahavamsa, you have to look at the Ashoka Avadana, then Buddha Ghosha in Samanta Pasadika. He gives some stories, and interestingly, any Burmese monks, anyone from Myanmar here? Yeah, where? So in the Lokapayati, which is a very late text, I think 11th century. In the Lokapayati also you find stories about Ashoka. Ajahn, I have a PDF of a book. There is a lovely book in which there is one paper by a scholar called John Strong who looks at the various versions, the different Ashokas, and tries to figure out who the real Ashoka may be. All right, so I have a few pictures. Can I just show you all quickly? Because then after the lunch break, I want to do something else. Yeah. Sorry to hurry all of you. But Ajanta is, this is the ceiling. The ceilings at Ajanta are gloriously painted. I mean, can you imagine, so many of you members of the monastic Sangha, imagine if you had to live in a vihara where the ceiling looked like this. And I was trying to turn and turn, because actually there are animals, there are flowers, there are plants. Can you see this is a goat or some kind? Here are the horns. This is the head. Here, can you see? This is the face. This is the eye, and this is the horn, and this is the body. There are animals, there are flowers, and very interestingly, people also. And again here, there is a whole panel in Ajanta which in popular terminology we call it the Persian embassy, because we cannot, these guys, look at the hat, and some of them also are having wine. So they were probably the Central Asian people who were coming into these regions, who were wearing these different clothes and had different styles. And this is what a cave in Ajanta looks like. Now, the drama of this is what? In this hall is built, right? We bring bricks or some materials and we build. This was a mountain of rock. And this has been dug out. So when you dig, you have to have a plan. There are pillars here. And on the other side of the pillar, there is a path for circumambulation, right? So when you see a big, huge mountain, then you have to have great skills in whatever is that architects do, drawings, and you have to understand the forces. And these are in India, in the Indian caves, in a lot of the early caves. So there are many things I couldn't show you, but this is one of them. You have wooden rafters like this. So these caves typically have a long structure, and at the far end is a stupa. This is a Mahayana cave. In the stupa itself, they depict a Buddha standing, and on top are the three umbrellas. He's a Chakravarti. Under the umbrella signifies royalty, right? Even today, when somebody is very senior, you hold the umbrella. Now, when these caves were excavated, they were in stone. But how do we know that earlier there was a tradition that had wood? Is because these here are actually, then they carved them out in stone. But in the caves in the hinterland of Mumbai, please come. I would be delighted to take you all. There are wooden rafters that are placed inside these. And that is, most scholars agree that this is a sort of replication of a wooden building design in the external world, which is sort of imported into the Buddhist architecture. And although it's a cave and it doesn't need the rafters, hang on. So, they had them placed, they have these niches, and it makes for a very, very beautiful aesthetic, because you have a long hall with these rafters, and there is the stupa. In the early caves, you have only the stupa. In the Mahayana caves, in the stupa, you find Buddha depicted. And yes, sorry, Frank. Yeah.
I'm just wanting to know
Yes.
if this in some way connects to the fact that the railings in the area near the east gate at Sanchi appear to be wooden.
Yeah. It is because that's the language you know, right? And it's in wood. But you're working in stone, and see, when they were donating to the Sangha, they were trying to do something that would last, that had some degree of permanence, right? Because you're making this donation for a particular cause, and you want them to have these spaces. So here, actually, is very strange. The wood is not there. They still carved it out in stone to keep that same image, right? The whole ambience. So you have, behind this is a curved space. In English, we use the term apse, when there is a curved end to a long hall. So this kind of structure is called apsidal. What is, never mind, that's a little bit not kosher. Okay, so I'll tell you later. So this is another cave, which is, here the Buddha is sitting in the Pralambapada. This is not the lotus position. The legs spread down is called Pralambapada. And over here on the top, these are the pillars. The pillar capitals are also exquisitely decorated, and so are these panels on the top. And then you have, so in this cave, actually, this is a very unusual cave and is one of the last of the caves at Ajanta. Behind these pillars, like I said, there is a passage for circumambulation. But in this cave, so the pillars are here, and I'm going circumambulating, but on this wall, there is carving. And the first one over there is the, Okay, so that's the end of my presentation for the morning. Yes, and we'll meet again in the afternoon. Thank you. Thank you for your patience.
Okay, very interesting in the morning session. Okay, we continue in the afternoon session. After we finish our lunch, please come here again. Maybe we try in the morning session to try to illustrate Buddhist art to all of us, and then when we see many pictures like this, we can sometimes the Buddha teaching can appear in our own mind, such as karuna and loving kindness and like this. So, okay, thank you very much in the morning session. See you at afternoon. We start at 1 p.m. Thank you very much. Enjoy in your lunch.